Hi there, and welcome to the Cotswold Explorer. I'm Robin Shuckburgh, and today you find Ross, Widget, Gizmo and me in the extremely famous village of Cropredy. Fame is of course relative. This village is famous for a critical battle in the Civil War of the 1640s. It's always fun to go over the ground of a great battle and see if it's possible to get a feeling of how it all panned out. Cropredy is easier to envision than many. Of all the many descriptions of the battle I've now read, I've found that none describe the events more clearly than our old favourite Herbert Evans, albeit written over a century ago, who was at his best when delving into the details of a good battle. So I'm going to read to you the passage from his Highways and Byways in Oxford and the Cotswolds, while Ross flies his drone and wields his camera round the existing village to show you how little or how much has really changed over the centuries. Firstly, however, we'll visit the beautiful old church of St Mary, which is mostly decorative or perpendicular in style, with a tower topped by battlements and a 19th century stair turret. There are lovely 4 bay arcades in the nave, giving the church a great sense of space. It contains 2 octagonal fonts, one highly decorated from the 19th century, and the other much older, probably Norman, but roughly reshaped to make it octagonal, and originally decked with brass plates on the flat surfaces. Gone now, but the holes of the fastenings are still visible. Above the vestry there was a priest's chamber, the windows of which now open onto the north chapel on one side and 2 others onto the south aisle. The lectern is extremely unusual in this part of the world outside Oxford. Pre-Reformation, so somehow hidden from the iconoclasts and restored to the church later, its brass eagle sits on a globe and its base is supported by lions. You will also find the remnants of a 15th century painting of the Last Judgment above the chancel arch, another rare survivor. But enough of this wonderful building, let's get to battle. Evans' description starts as follows as he makes his way from Hanwell. My road now leads me down through the village to the top of the Boughton Hill, overlooking the green valley of the Cherwell. From this vantage ground, on the morning of June the 29th, 1644, Sir William Waller watched the Royal Army marching northwards on the other side of the river. This manoeuvre had been executed by the King with the view of drawing the Parliamentary General from the strong position which he occupied on Crouch Hill, south of Banbury, and so bringing him to an engagement. In this, as we shall see, he was successful. Sir William, on his part, was no less anxious to fight than the King. His troops were merely volunteers, composed of the London-trained bands and country levies, all heartily tired of soldiering and eager to get back to their homes. They had not, like the men on the other side, taken up arms with any idea of entering the service as a profession, and the experience of this day convinced their general that nothing short of a radical reformation in this respect could ensure the ultimate success of the parliamentary cause. Yet a decisive advantage might help to keep his men together for a time, and we may well believe that it was with an anxious heart that he surveyed the enemy, separated from him only by the village of Cropredy and the bridge over the Cherwell, which was to give its name to that day's fight. At last he saw his opportunity. For some reason unknown to him, the van and centre of the royal columns had hurried forward above the bridge, leaving the rear in an isolated position below it. How this had come to pass we shall see directly, but for a moment we will leave him, and descending the hill, pass through the village to the bridge, and survey the field of battle for ourselves. 2 centuries and a half have rolled away since then, but the general features of the landscape have altered little. There is the venerable church itself, more than 300 years old on the day when the battle was fought. And there are the clustered roofs of the cottages, brown thatch or grey tile, looking much as they did then, for in these old-world villages fashions change but slowly. There the little river comes bending round beneath the church on its way from Edgecote, which Charles had quitted nearly 2 years earlier in the grey dawn of an October morning, passing over this very bridge on his march to Kinnerton Field. And there, half a mile downstream, is the Slate Mill and its ancient ford, a passage to be contested today as hotly as the bridge itself. I say today, for in endeavouring to recall the scenes of a vanished time, the fancy is prone to fall into the present. But in sober earnest it is a bright summer's evening in the 20th century, and an aged countryman is leaning over the wooden parapet of the bridge, in the contemplative mood that bespeaks the close of the labours of the day. Yes, he has heard of the fighting. It was only 9 or 10 years ago that his son was at work on the widening of the bridge and picked up bullets and other curiosities in the bed of the stream, and hence he opines that here on the bridge they've finished it up. But he loves better to talk of things within his own recollection, of the coal which he used to cart to Edgecote and other outlying villages before the new railway came, or of the great families of the neighbourhood, some of whom, alas, were absentees and had let their estates at a mighty sum. Of one of the most interesting relics he does not tell me. This is a small bugle-shaped whistle of silver, attached by 2 chains to a ring, which must have been lost in the course of the struggle by some officer. It was discovered in grubbing up a hedge some 50 years since, and is now in the possession of Mr. Loveday of Williamscote House, hard by Slate Mill, whose ancestor, Captain Loveday, served in the King's army, and it may be in this very battle. To that June morning we must now return. Eastward from the bridge, the ground rises in the direction of the village of Wardington, and on the summit on this side of the Daventry road there stands an ash tree, the successor of a famous tree known as the Wardington ash, which perished of natural decay more than a century ago. Charles had reached this spot and was dining beneath the shade of this stately tree when news was brought to him that a party of 300 horse was advancing from the north to join the forces of the enemy. He at once gave orders that the van and centre should push forward and cut them off, but in the hurry of the moment no notice was sent to the rearguard, which was at some little distance behind, together with the cavalry brigades of the Earl of Northampton and the Earl of Cleveland. This oversight, as we have seen, Waller's eye had not been slow to detect. Here was the chance he had been waiting for, and he forthwith dispatched a strong party of horse and foot to cross the bridge and take the royalist rearguard in front, while another body of horse was ordered to pass the river by the ford at Slate Mill and fall upon them from behind. The former easily drove back from the bridge the dragoons whom the king had posted there earlier in the day, and clattering across were advancing to attack the leading division, when they were brought up by a gallant charge of the Earl of Cleveland and driven back by the way they had come. Before long, however, they rallied and got themselves into order for a second advance, but by this time the king, alarmed by the noise of the melee, had halted, and realizing the state of affairs, sent Lord Bernard Stewart in all haste to the assistance of the rear. Meanwhile, and before Stewart could reach him, Cleveland had formed his brigade on the hill round the Wardington ash, but only to find the hedges within gunshot of him lined with the enemy, both horse and foot. This, says an eyewitness, caused him suddenly to advance, the rebels doing the like, and having stoutly stood out their musket and carbine shot, he gave command to charge, and by his singular valour and resolution, seconded by the officers of his brigade, he routed all those horse and foot, and chased them beyond their cannon, all which, being 11 pieces, were then taken, and 2 barricades of wood, drawn with wheels, in each 7 small brass and leathern guns, charged with case shot. Many of the enemy were slain, and many prisoners taken. The rest were driven pell-mell over the bridge. This, however, the Earl was unable to carry, and was therefore compelled to fall back, having lost on his side 2 gallant gentlemen of Kent, Sir William Boteler and Sir William Clark, and, says my authority, not above 14 soldiers more. Meanwhile, the Earl of Northampton had been equally successful against the party who had crossed by the ford. Scarcely had they made their way across and begun to threaten his rear, when he faced about and forced them to a speedy flight over the pass, i.e. the ford, but with little loss, they not being willing to abide a second charge. It was now 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the fighting was practically at an end. The advantage lay with the king, but he was unable to push it further. He secured the ford and the mill, but the enemy held grimly to the bridge, and all his efforts to dislodge them were in vain. Waller was worsted, but far from annihilated, and for the rest of the day and the whole of the next, the armies lay facing each other on either side of the Cherwell, the king sleeping both nights at a very poor man's house at Williamscott. Early on Monday morning, intelligence having arrived that a large force under Major General Brown was advancing to join Waller, Charles deemed it expedient to fall back upon Hainault and Deddington. At Deddington he lay at the parsonage house, probably the fine house already mentioned on the north side of the churchyard, and on the following day he set out for Evesham. But whatever hopes he may have built upon the discomfiture of Waller were soon to be dashed. As he was marching with colours flying through the pleasant Oxfordshire villages on that fatal 2nd of July, another scene was being enacted in the north, and he was soon to be met by the disastrous tidings of the defeat of Marston Moor. It's a great description, and reminds us in this time of such upheaval in the world that little is new under the sun. Gruesome death and destruction follows us around like a ravening wolf.